With the world being knee-deep into the first month of 2018, many of us have put the past year behind us. We're learning from our mistakes and starting fresh. And me, I'm doing the best thing I can possibly do at this time, reminding everyone of all the crap that we got last year. No wonder I don't have many friends in real life. Just as I counted down the top 10 best cartoon episodes of 2017 a few weeks ago, I decided to switch gears and talk about the worst that TV animation had to offer from last year. It was a little tough putting this list together, since I had to search through all the good shows I kept up with and find duds. Because of that, you could probably put most of these episodes in any order, since all but a few are basically on the same level of quality. You also won't see many episodes from shows that were outright bad or mediocre, since I barely cared to keep up with them. The same rules from the last list apply to this one too. Only one episode per show, no Netflix shows because I didn't really watch any of them, and if a miniseries or special was split up into multiple parts, I can select one of those parts to be on the list. With all that said, this is the top 10 worst cartoon episodes of 2017, or as I like to call it, remember all of those episodes that sucked? Star vs. the Forces of Evil is a show that's filled with minor problems, and the quality of its episodes reflect that. For that reason, I had a hard time picking the worst episode from the show, since very few episodes of it sink below or above being okay. Trick Star is a slightly forgettable episode with a terrible name about Star confronting a magician at a birthday party named Preston Changeo, who Star, and only Star for some reason, sees sucking the joy from people after he performs his tricks. Preston Changeo is actually voiced by Weird Al, but I honestly can't remember his character's name without looking him up. Nothing about this character really stands out, and that's disappointing when he's voiced by a guy who stands out in every way. I can only remember roughly 2 jokes from the episode, and the only other thing in it to note is the ending, which is the reason why it's on this list at all. Star makes Preston tell the other partygoers what he was doing, but they aren't angry at Preston about that. They're angry at Star for accidentally causing Preston to spoil the secrets behind the tricks. I could see this being a deliberate decision by Preston to make himself seem more sympathetic next to Star, since he is kind of a shady guy, but he disappears from the episode right after this event goes down. This ending wasn't very funny either, so I'm not completely sure what the intention behind it really was. I'm not going to act like this is the worst episode of Star vs. the Forces of Evil ever, or a very bad episode at all. Trick Star was just unmemorable and left a bad taste in my mouth. It was one of a few Season 2 filler episodes that was between a set that introduced the various members of the Royal High Commission, and I can tell that not nearly as much time was put into it as the others. And because of that, I'm not going to put any more time towards talking about this episode. Yes, I know that this is truly the segue of the century. Hey Simpsons, you guys aren't South Park. I just wanted you to know that so that you don't make another episode that's dated the instant it comes out, like the one you did about Pokemon Go that came out 8 months after everyone forgot about it. Never do that again. A few jokes about Pokemon or Pokemon Go in a random episode would have been fine, but devoting half of the episode looking for Mr. Goodbart to making jokes that everyone else made months ago makes this whole episode seem so lazy and cashing in on a trend that was long since dead. The only reason why this episode isn't higher up on the list is because the episode's other plot was pretty decent. It was a somewhat heartwarming story about Bart befriending an elderly woman named Phoebe after she pays him to pretend to be her family member. It takes a somewhat dark turn towards the end, but one that the show plays off pretty well. Nancy Cartwright was actually nominated for an Emmy for her performance as Bart in this episode, and I can say that she and guest star Jennifer Saunders both do great jobs here. Bad parody aside, most of this episode is typical fare for modern Simpsons, with some average jokes alongside some bright spots here and there. This episode also gets extra praise from me for giving a cameo to one of my favorite minor characters, Ian the Very Tall Man. Yes, that is actually his name. I relate to him so much sometimes. I still feel like The Simpsons could be a great show once more if it were taken in a new creative direction, but this is not the way to do it. What a great way to celebrate the franchise's 30th anniversary. I love OKKO, but on top of having minor problems, it's had a couple of below average episodes. The worst of them so far being Just Be a Pebble, only because it has some very frustrating elements. KO is sick of being small, so he eats a few too many of some size enhancing candies, because it makes sense for those to be sold at a convenience store, and grows too huge to do his job. KO's size really goes to his head in more ways than one, because he begins to think that he can do anything, and that causes him more harm than good. KO ends up sending Mr. Gar's keys down the sewer drain, because Mr. Gar was too stupid to realize that KO has become too big to properly get the keys out between his car seat. This was a forced catalyst for the episode's climax, and it felt out of character for Gar to think that this was going to end well. KO is also a bit more annoying than funny here, but his new arrogant attitude doesn't harm the episode too much.
Check out this other huge thing.
It's still fairly funny, and KO's fight in the sewers with a mutant rat is pretty cool. But by the high standards of the show, this episode is pretty weak. Most of its problems can be chalked up to this being the crew's first effort. Despite Just Be a Pebble being the 13th episode of the series, it was the first to be produced. That's why the art style is a little off and the colors are less saturated. I feel like this ended up being a great idea in the long run, since it helped give the crew some practice before they made the great episodes that opened the series and hooked me and many others into watching. But even with its history in mind, Just Be a Pebble is still a weak episode. But it still speaks volumes to the quality of OKKO when a weak episode with a few flaws is as bad as it gets. There's already more than enough reasons to dislike the Powerpuff Girls reboot, but now you can add stealing ideas from fanfiction.net to that list. The Power of 4 special ended with one of the more entertaining and compelling episodes of the series so far. But to enjoy it, you have to accept the dumb premise for the whole special, as outlined in its second episode, Bliss Reminisce. And yes, this special was actually 5 episodes strung together. It's revealed through a flashback that Bliss was actually the first Powerpuff Girl made, with sugar, spice. The W stands for wow, so original. However, her powers were unstable and she exiled herself for a decade so she wouldn't hurt anyone. Not only is this the laziest backstory that you could give to a character like this, but it also raises more questions than it answers. Why was only one girl created with the main 3 ingredients instead of 3? Is this supposed to fit in with the continuity of the original series? Other episodes hint that the reboot is supposed to be a continuation of sorts. But why are Professor Utonium's motivations to make the girls different than they were in Get Back Jojo? Why is Jojo slightly green here before the Powerpuff Girls were created instead of tan like he should be? And what happened with all of the Professor's experiments with chemicals A through V? Most importantly, why am I getting so bent out of shape about continuity in the Powerpuff Girls? I'm going to blame the episode for doing that because my judgment isn't better. The backstory itself is also told in a very mediocre way. I can't tell if I'm supposed to feel bad for Bliss and take her backstory seriously when parts of it are so forced and silly and the voice actors aren't sure about how to deliver their lines. Like this yell from the professor sounds ridiculous, yet the sequence is the basis for a character that is the focus of her own arc. Bliss's design is also terrible. Her neon blue hair clashes with the realistic hair tones of the other girls, and the white strips on her legs are treated as long leggings when they should just be socks. Also, I know she's significantly older than the other girls, but making only her legs longer makes all of her proportions seem off, and she looks ridiculously big when put next to Blossom, Bubbles, and Buttercup. Bliss is just a mess of ideas that are all trying to get the most attention possible. All signs point to her being a product of a team of executives, and one of the last chances for the show to get a little extra attention before it ends. Alright, I know that I went on a slight tangent here, and Bliss Reminisce itself is not nearly as dumb as its focus.
Yes, join your best friend forever, forever!
No!
So this is all that I will ever say about Bliss herself.
No me gusta!
Fancy Schmancy seems to be a typical episode of Season 10 Fairly Odd Parents. Timmy's parents drag him to the Fancy Schmancy Country Club since Timmy's dad is now rich on the show now, and Chloe can't go because she isn't schmancy enough. Timmy is actually upset about this because for some reason he actually likes Chloe now and wants to celebrate their friendiversary together by taking advantage of the gift she gave him. To make a long story short, the episode isn't very funny, and even after having seen several episodes with it, the flash animation is still off-putting. It's so strange seeing the show have the same framing and backgrounds, but at the same time have characters with stiff movements and see them drawn extremely consistently. The animation was the last thing that the newest Fairly Odd Parents episodes had going for them, but they managed to screw even that up. You could argue that other Fairly Odd Parents episodes from this year were worse than Fancy Schmancy. Episodes like Certified Supersitter and Dad Lannis had the same problems as this episode, but they also did things that were even worse.
I brought some friends home. Well, one friend and one harbinger of doom. It's gonna be huge.
The only other notable thing in Fancy Schmancy itself is that it has a very strong vendetta against a Weird Al parody that it kicks around throughout the whole episode. But the sticking point as to why Fancy Schmancy was the one to make it onto the list is because it may be the final episode of the Fairly Odd Parents to ever be produced. Even though the show has been renewed for additional seasons after production wraps numerous times, many signs point to season 10 being the end of the series. The last couple of episodes from the season were dumped onto the Nicktoons network, which is where Nickelodeon has killed basically all of their Nicktoons for the past 10 years, and the show's animation budget got drastically reduced, as I already mentioned. I also suspect that they were trying to cut costs down on music production too, as seen here. Well, what do you think about that, Timmy?
It makes me very sad. Boo-hoo.
Now, I'm kind of happy about the series ending at last, but I'm disappointed that it may have happened with an episode like this. I would be more understanding about the season ending with such a mundane episode if the past few Fairly Odd Parents season finales hadn't been major episodes that were either big adventures or answered questions that had kind of been left unanswered. Episodes like The Fairy Beginning or Wishology may not have been the series' best work, but both of them still would have ended the series on a satisfying note. To make matters worse, Fancy Schmancy first aired with Spring Breakup as its sister episode. It makes me question why Fancy Schmancy was even made, as this episode has basically the same plot, but with better visuals and slightly better humor. I don't know if Fancy Schmancy was intended to be the season 10 finale, but if it was, that's extremely disappointing. No matter what you think of the Fairly Odd Parents now, any show that stayed on the air for 15 years deserves some kind of big send-off. It's too bad that the crew currently behind the show didn't even attempt to do that.
Happy friend anniversary!
I thought that season 10 of SpongeBob SquarePants had abandoned the trend of recycling episode ideas and doing nothing new with them besides adding filler. But here comes Plankton Retires, which is basically New Leaf, but just not as entertaining. After 3 minutes of filler, Plankton gives up trying to steal the Krabby Patty's secret formula and retires to a retirement home. But Mr. Krabs doesn't believe that Plankton is really retiring, so he and SpongeBob spy on Plankton until it's revealed that it was actually part of a scheme all along. Whoa, I didn't see that one coming. Besides the reused plot, none of the jokes work, and the only thing I liked was the animation during the filler montage at the start. Though great animation is kind of par for the course for SpongeBob Season 10. The ending twist of all the characters actually being robot duplicates is also a little contrived and not very funny. The Season 5 episode Spy Buddies had a similar twist with all the characters being different characters all along, but that twist was actually set up at the start of the episode, and it wasn't just a random dumb way to resolve it. There were a few other SpongeBob episodes this year that also had problems, but with all of them, I could think of a moment or something notable that I really enjoyed, but not with Plankton Retires. It's just a boring rehash that doesn't even get what made the episode it's rehashing good to begin with. New Leaf almost makes you believe that Plankton could have actually changed his ways through some very compelling character interactions. But Plankton Retires doesn't even try to hide the fact that it's all just a scheme, and it strips away any kind of tension that the episode could have possibly had. I know recycling is good for the environment and all, but hopefully this trend will stop before the bad SpongeBob episodes start getting rehashed. I can't wait for Waiting, but at a DMV, or A Day with an extremely large amount of tears. Wait, A Day Without Tears was already that to begin with. From what I've seen, people can be very harsh when it comes to the Loud House. The weaker episodes that it has tend to only suffer from a flaw or two, but I've seen a lot of people use that as a basis for writing off an entire episode as being mediocre or bad. However, I don't think the Loud House has yet to have a bad episode, as seen with No Such Luck. Lincoln shows up to one of his sister Lynn's baseball games, and when they happen to lose, she blames Lincoln for the loss, claiming that he is bad luck. Based on that one experience, the rest of the Loud family begins to cast Lincoln away from them more and more, not wanting his supposed bad luck to affect them. Lincoln takes advantage of this at first, using it to get out of going to his sister's events, but even when he learns his lesson and admits his mistake, his family still doesn't trust him, and only with a convoluted plan is Lincoln able to win back his family over to his side. The message behind this episode, to not take advantage of other people's superstitions, is alright, but the way it's executed is very poor. It's such a stretch for Lynn to assume that Lincoln is bad luck just because he was there during one bad game. You can't make such a big assumption like that based off of only one event, especially since I don't think this has been a trait associated with Lincoln before. Also, once Lincoln admitted to the rest of his family that he had just been playing up his bad luck, the episode should have ended. They've had enough experience with Lincoln to know that he's probably telling the truth, but nope, gotta get that episode to 11 minutes somehow. Besides the poor character motivations, no such luck is just a dull Loud House episode, but it really could have used some extra polishing to make the whole premise a little less contrived. Fun fact, this episode had the second highest amount of viewers for any episode of the Loud House so far, yet it didn't have any special advertising. I guess that's just luck for ya. Season 21 of South Park had this problem where the episodes seemed to target a certain person or subject, but the point that they were trying to make with it wasn't clear. In its third episode, the show even had a line that seemed to target those who criticized this problem.
You have to overdo it in today's society, Stan. You can't be nuanced and subtle anymore, else critics go, wow, what was the point of that?
While it's true that parts of some Season 21 episodes went over my head, the comment section of my review can confirm that, the episodes where I found this specifically to be a problem seemed to go over everyone's heads. And the worst of those episodes was white people renovating houses. Not only was it the least funny episode of the season, with its Alexa and redneck jokes that weren't funny the first or fifth time that they were said, but I still don't know what it was trying to say about the Charlottesville riots or house flipping shows. The episode talks about its topics in ways that are neither profound or funny. Because it's the season premiere, it also tries to cover a lot of different things at once, to make up for the show being off the air for 9 months. That's kind of understandable, but in doing so, it spreads itself too thin, making for an episode that ends up accomplishing nothing. If white people renovating houses had a smaller focus, then it probably wouldn't seem like such a confusing mess of ideas. It's ironic that the best episode of Season 20 was its premiere, yet the worst episode of Season 21 was its premiere. I guess the creators did manage to make this season different than 20 in that way. I think that whenever he's the central focus of any episode, Ronaldo from Steven Universe can be a very annoying character. So what a surprise that Rocknaldo, an episode where Ronaldo is the central focus, was very aggravating to watch. The flaws that Rocknaldo has are similar to a lot of bad SpongeBob episodes that involve SpongeBob torturing Squidward. Sometimes Squidward doesn't deserve his suffering, and SpongeBob comes off as annoying to the audience rather than charming and funny. The same applies here, except the Squidward in this episode is the more sympathetic one, making the insults thrown at him seem even less deserved. I might have enjoyed Rocknaldo a whole lot more if Ronaldo wasn't as annoyingly snooty, or if Steven didn't give him an apology that he didn't earn. It certainly doesn't help that this is one of the most mundane episodes of the whole series. The plot feels like it would be more at home in a sitcom, and when I wasn't being annoyed, I was just bored by the lack of good humor or interactions. Ronaldo can work in small doses for me. He's even responsible for my favorite joke from Season 5 so far.
I'm just gonna assume by your silence that you're entangled within the immersive koala lore of the show. Did you get to the part where Koala Princess and Kangaroofus kiss?
But in the future, unless they go in an extremely different direction with Ronaldo, I hope he stays far away from the spotlight.
Do you know, I always felt strangely at home here.
No, you are not living here.
Alright, before we get to number 1, here's a few quick honorable mentions. The infernal internship of Mark Beeks from the Ducktales reboot. The conflict between Huey and Dewey is super forced, the Google/Apple/Facebook jokes are already dated, and Mark Beeks himself is too goofy to be taken seriously as the villain here. However, the bickering between Scrooge and Glomgold in the subplot is hilarious, and some of the funniest stuff on the show so far. Screwball Live from Marvel's Spider-Man. Individually, all the other episodes from this show have been super bland, but this one has the added bonus of being absolutely ridiculous. Parts of it are so stupid that they make it kind of enjoyable. I'll talk about this one more in a big Spider-Man cartoon video that I'm currently working on, but for now, all that you need to know is that in this episode, Spider-Man goes up against an internet prankster who cares more about views than the lives of innocents. I can't make this kind of stuff up. The worst from the amazing world of Gumball. Gender and role stereotypes are shoved in your face with little original commentary. Luckily, this is a Gumball episode, so there's still a good amount of witty dialogue and fun gags here.
Challenge accepted. Challenge accepted.
Challenge.
I've got one more honorable mention, and it's every single episode of Teen Titans Go that aired last year. I only saw 2 of them, but I know they all suck because they aren't the original series, and Cartoon Network plays them way too much, and...
Hello? Nick, it's Matt. Remember the nuclear reviewer from that Sonic X collab from a year ago? The one everyone watched? Is he even here? Nick?
Hey,
Nick?
flip the paper over.
This paper?
Yeah, just do it. It's gonna be super funny. It's a joke no one's ever done before.
Okay.
Check it out! I'm Pickle Nick!
Why are you a piece of paper, though? Wouldn't that be paper, Nick?
I actually didn't have enough money to go out and buy actual pickles and sew my face to them. So in the meantime, all you have is Pickle Nick! Look, Rick and Morty Season 3 is not the bottom of the barrel when it comes to animation. I can tell that a ton of effort was put into it, but I truly found so many of the episodes to be mediocre. I went into every new episode in the season hoping that it would be as great as an episode from the previous 2 seasons, but with all but 4 episodes, I was let down. By the end of the season, I had lost most of my interest in it. But things were different at the start. I think that everyone was looking forward to Pickle Rick. The amount of tension that it got before the season officially premiered was huge, and the premise alone seemed like it had a ton of potential, but then the episode came out and it was kind of terrible. There's a good episode in there somewhere, and it does have some fantastic action, but it's surprisingly really boring. I have no reason to care about Rick's adventures as a pickle. Nothing is really on the line here, and we all know that Rick is going to be okay because he's Rick. The fact that he is self-destructive and basically an unstoppable force is part of his character, and something that some of the previous episodes have already explored. I could let this slide if the episode was still interesting or funny, but it isn't. All it amounts to is Rick killing everything and everyone in sight in incredibly gory action sequences. There's an incredible attention to detail in the designs and movements of the characters here, but if I'm being honest, I find most of it to be a little disgusting. For about a minute, it's kind of funny, but there's no stakes or anything remotely interesting or inventive here. I'm always up for a little mindless cartoon violence, but it's kind of an insult to Rick and Morty that I have to describe it using the word mindless. The subplot with Beth, Morty, and Summer going to therapy is also bad. All it amounts to is the therapist blatantly stating the themes and message of the episode. This is literally all this character does and all that happens during this subplot. There are so many better ways that this message could have been conveyed rather than literally spelling it out to the viewers. This is the definition of tell, don't show, and this was probably the biggest problem with Season 3. I know that they were trying to create a contrast between a really exciting plot and a more mundane one, but both of them are super uninteresting and have very few jokes too. I know that there are a few good lines, and I do like the new character Jaguar that is introduced here, but none of it really helps this episode overcome its major problems. Plus, nowadays, Rick and Morty introduces a character that is especially weird or cool each week just so they can put them on a t-shirt. I can't be the only one who feels like some characters or situations were created just to sell merch, especially when most of said merch was released only hours after the episode that it tied into aired. I'm sure glad that I'm not one of those suckers who fell for that potential marketing tactic. Pickle Rick might just be the worst episode that this show has ever produced. It's got good in it, but it's incredible that they managed to make such a strange and fun concept so boring. If the whole episode was just Rick screaming, "I'm Pickle Rick!" for 22 minutes, it would have had the same effect. I fully understand that this is an episode where the main character turns himself into a pickle, but it's also a Rick and Morty episode, and I expect a little more substance from it. This is not the kind of show that should be talking down to its viewers either, telling them what they should think about the characters instead of implying it. Rick and Morty is a smart show, but it also has scenes like this. It's really not as smart as the episode thinks it is. Now, with both the best and worst animation of the year recapped, I can move on to talking about bigger, and more importantly, better things in 2018. Are you excited for those, Timmy?
Please stop asking me questions. You are really getting on my nerves. If you do not stop, I will eat you.